Cho. Dial. Farron. Hannon. Euchman. Bauer. Chaplin. Quorum is present.
Oh, thank you. I beg your pardon. Do we have any audience participation? I see there's people in the audience. So please come forward. Could you give us your name and where you live?
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Simmons. I'm here with my wife, Heather. We're at 1316 West Ridge Lane. I have just actually a question and a comment. First of all, with regard to the use of the Round Barn Road situation, is it look at this point that that's going to be the, to use a term, the permanent link stop between the routes? And if so, will there at some point be a bench, maybe a shelter, and one of the electronic signs out there?
I think I'll let Carl answer that.
Okay.
You don't want to give it a try?
Well, I think I know the answer, but you're the expert.
I wouldn't want to go so far as to say it's permanent. We are having conversations with several entities for a more permanent solution. But if we call this temporary, I would say that there's a better than likely chance that it's a midterm to long-term temporary situation, because whatever the permanent solution is not going to be a quick rival to that solution. Because of that, we are aware of the lack of amenities, and we are, excuse me, talking with the city about some assistance in figuring out how we can fit some of those amenities into a very tight space. And so that conversation also is ongoing, but unfortunately I don't have any definitive answers.
Okay. The only other comment I had, I'm specifically here because I'm interested in the Illinois terminal expansions. I think we all are.
Yes.
And so I presume there's no public comment during that. I just want to let people know one of the things I will be most interested in is the plans for financing and funding that. So I'll be looking for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The item on the agenda today is a matter of just getting information. There will be an opportunity later on, if it actually comes to signing contracts and all that kind of, there will be an opportunity for comment from the public. Any other comments? Yes. Could you please state your name and your address, please?
My name is Eric Worth. I am a DSC client, and my address is 301 South Country Fair Drive, apartment 49.
Thank you.
I would like to wonder, with this, before when the new schedule comes out, I am wondering about with these, when they talked about only allowing buses to stop at where they have the bus stop signs, if chances could be, with the number of disabled people that live over at Grand Mercy Park Apartments, and with the number of disabled people who would attempt to get off that Country Fair Drive, was wondering if there could be a chance that, even though that since they have only a bus stop sign on the west side of Country Fair Drive, right by Grand Mercy Park Apartments, I was wondering if there could be a possibility that there could be a special stop to allow the drivers, when they come northbound on Country Fair Drive, that they could still be allowed to at least make a stop there at Grand Mercy Park Apartments, just to maybe at least only drop off passengers, but not to pick them up.
Again, Carl, we are trying very much to make the designated stops at places where people could get on and would want to get on. But I know that the planners are eager to know if there are difficulties with the stops that have been so far marked. Carl?
Yeah, no, that's a good comment, and I would just add on, sir, Amy Snyder, she's floating around in back here. Amy Snyder, our customer service manager, is going to touch base with you and get a little bit more information from you, and we can work on accommodating the situation that you're talking about.
And then one other thing is, if it turns out, if also, if it comes to where if it turns out permanently, if the buses end up having their permanent main stop over on Round Barn Road, one other thing that I have tried to see about doing was one of my managers from over at Grand Mercy Park Apartments had tried to do was they had tried getting in contact with one of the MTD managers, and plus with the city, about where they was gonna, because since there is a number of disabled people over at Grand Mercy Park Apartments that catches the MTD buses, and what we was trying to think on doing was we was trying to see what we can do to where to figure out on where we was wanting to be able to put a bench, at least a bench in by where the bus stop was, and we was gonna get in contact with the city where they can help out, because we was gonna get it to where that they can get it put in to where it'd be well secured so that no one would steal it or anything, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But because I would say if it has to, if the managers would need to, I have here the card for the manager that
Of the apartments?
yeah,
Okay.
because his name is Jacob Gall, and where you would be able to get a hold of him if you would need to talk to him about the details on with trying to get this bench put in, because it's just only a bench that we're trying to put in, not a bus shelter, because I was just only wanting to put at least a bench in where it would give a place to sit while waiting on the buses, because I wanted it to be a bench so that it would make it easy for the maintenance workers whenever they would have to do like the mowing and everything. It would make it easy for them to get around the bench and everything.
Those are great suggestions.
Yes.
And Amy can help you with those. If you have some time, if you could just meet with Amy, she can get that information from you, and I think we'll be able to help you out. Okay?
Okay,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
thank you.
Are there any other persons who wish to speak? Okay, then let's move on to the approval of the minutes of the last board meeting, which was June 28th, 2017. Do I hear a motion to approve? A motion has been made, second? Woo-hoo. Okay, a motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes as distributed in the packet. All those in favor, please say aye. Against? No?
I wasn't there.
Okay.
I wasn't there, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, sorry, I forgot that. Okay. Are there any communications that have been received?
What's that? I can still approve them?
I don't think we have, no, I guess we do have enough, never mind.
You have a quorum.
Well, I can't vote, can I? Oh, well, I approve the minutes. Okay, enough about the minutes. Are there any communications that have been received? No? Then let's go on to the managing director's report.
Okay, these statistics are for June. The June ridership was 424,219. That is a 6.08% reduction from June of 2016. Year-to-date ridership was 5.26% below FY 2016. The June 2017 operating revenue was $539,022, or 30% below June of 2016. And the year-to-date operating revenue was $8,944,401, which is 1.2% below FY 2016. And I just want to point out that that large June differential that occurs every July when we look at the June month, and it's because we have year-end corrections that are made during the audit process. And so there's an accumulation of things that occur during the entire year that end up getting backloaded into the month of June. And so June always looks a little out of whack compared to the rest of the months. So it's not that anything actually out of the ordinary happened in June. It's just closing out the fiscal year through the audit process. And in terms of the revenue, this one in particular was because of as I mentioned in the report, a bump in, we had a closeout with the University of Illinois contract where they had accumulated some student fees that didn't get paid to us actually from several fiscal years. And so this was a correction to that. And so June looks very strange, but it was kind of a one-off in terms of the degree that it looks strange, but June always looks strange because it has year-end corrections made in it. Moving on.
Well, you got MCOR on top of everything else too, right?
MCOR, the construction doesn't really, relative to the revenue, MCOR doesn't really impact the revenue. So it certainly will impact the ridership, but yes, the ridership for sure. The June operating expenses were $2,658,000. That's 38.2% below June of 2016. And the year-to-date operating was $32,690,000, and that's 2.9% below FY 2016. And so reference my earlier comment about the year-end postings to the ledger, and that's what makes June look strange. The year-to-date operating revenue is above budget by $537,000, and the year-to-date operating expenses are $4.5 million below budget. And then the only other two things that I will mention here that we won't be talking about later is that I think you all are aware that we finally have a state budget, and that helps. There was a change to the way that the funding is placed into the downstate transit account, and that's happening in a direct deposit fashion now. And so that will be happening on a more regular, recurring basis. And so that account should be fully funded. It should be funded, so the comptroller should be able to draw from it and make the quarterly payments. And the downside to that was that there was a 10% reduction in the amount of money that goes into the account. But if the state finishes making the transfers from last fiscal year, then that would make up for that 10%, and we would in effect be held harmless for the fiscal year if that occurs. So fingers crossed. That is all I have on those pages. On page 8, the only item I'm going to directly mention is the ridership study. We've been talking to a vendor for a mobile fare payment system called Token Transit, and during the most recent conversation that we had with them, it came up that they were wanting to introduce a manner in which trip, origin, and destinations could be identified, which, Bruce, is exactly what we have been talking about doing with the computer science students with the university. So that really piqued my interest, and so we're having further conversations with them to see if we can be the pilot system for them to launch this aspect of their product. So I'm cautiously excited about that, and we'll see where that conversation goes. And with that, if you have any questions through page 45 of the board packet, I'd be happy to entertain those.
I'd like to ask a question about what you just said. So this system is not in actual use in any place yet? This is a sort of the beta project?
The product, Token Transit, is in place in several transit systems. It's used all across the country. The aspect of their product where they're tracking the origin and destination point, that is not in use anywhere yet. So this would be an opportunity for us to be the pilot program for them for that.
Carl, and I was happy you made a few comments. I'd be interested in a little more so I can get a grasp on it. Your comment about and it's in your notes, I have it underlined, the 10% cut. Is that a fair statement, cut? And but it seems like then you had the cut, but you're bringing forth money from last year, or it seems like a 10% reduction in the grant is a significant thing that needs to be accounted for.
Yeah,
Help me understand.
well, it's difficult to understand. We wade pretty quickly into deep water with how the grant program works. Where the 10% reduction is applied is in the transfer of the funds into the downstate transit account. So there's a formula that is used that determines what the amount is supposed to be that goes into the account. And once that formula is run and that amount is determined, let's call it X dollars, instead of transferring X dollars into the account, they are taking X dollars minus 10% and transferring that into the account. Now, what has happened in the past is those transfers at the end of the year total more than what the accumulated expenses draw down from statewide. And so there's money left over in that account, and that in the past had become what would be transferred into our capital funding program. So we're talking about an operating account, but the leftover money would in effect, they'd wave their magic wand and turn it from operating funds into capital funds. And so then IDOT would have a grant program to allow systems to buy buses or, build a new garage or whatever, a capital project. In effect, what has happened with the 10% cut is there's not going to be any leftover money, and in fact, it's just deep enough that there's a likelihood that the account would be underfunded. But if they make the transfers from last year that are still pending, of which there are 8, that would take the extra amount from last year and fill up the fund so that the account isn't underfunded. I'm positive I've lost you by now.
No, in my understanding, I get you have this pot of money that has been not totally utilized. I guess my question in following this thought process is 10% is 10% of a sum, so they may have the ability to pull that money into this year, but won't that be a problem next year?
Well, we don't know what will happen next year. We don't, the 10%, as it's written in the language of the current budget implementation bill, it's a one-year cut. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't happen again next year. It just means that as it's written now, it's not recurring. So I don't know at this stage what will happen next year or any year after that relative to a cut. If hypothetically it did stay in place, then transit systems all across the state would, A, lose the only capital funding source that they have through the state with this rollover happening, and we'd be looking at some reduction of expenses to accommodate that underfunding. But at this stage, I can't tell you how much that is.
Yeah, no, I could appreciate it, and it's still, but I guess just projecting, I can't anticipate the state situation is going to improve, which means that 10% probably, and maybe even more going forward, even based on national level cutbacks. So hopefully we're cognizant of that and, have some built-in plans to accommodate that.
We are definitely cognizant of it. Yep.
That's a significant amount of money. And, you can only dig so deep in the old pot, like you said, and then you hit bottom.
Well, I don't want, we are cognizant of it, and it could be significant. The cut to any one transit system would unlikely be 10%. It would be something less than that. Because it, is, again, where it gets super complicated, but you have X minus 10%, and that may or may not fund what the expenses are, what 65% of the state's, of the downstate expenses. And so if it's underfunded, it's not going to be a 10% cut, because 65% of the downstate expenses does not equal 100% of the money in the account now. So it's not a one-for-one cut. Clear as mud, right?
Well, it sounds like past state budgets, you know, smoke and mirrors.
Well, yeah, it's not that. It's just, if I could draw it out on a piece of paper, it'd be easier to understand. I didn't come here prepared to do that, but
No, I wouldn't anticipate
but
it,
we
but I was
we
just.
can meet, we can meet, and I can kind of walk you through it, and
Well, in August, we'll have that opportunity.
yeah, okay.
Any other questions for Carl? Yes.
Carl, back on token transit, I'm interested in if there's a timeline associated with what you anticipate with that, and also just a clear definition of what direct services are. I know what Safe Rides is, but want to be sure that I understand what direct
Timeline, I don't have, I don't know what the timeline would be at this point. I mean, we're talking to them, and they are getting a proposal to us. I haven't gotten that yet, but I'm expecting it in the relatively near future, and then we'll talk about what the costs are and how that will play out. And then let me make a clarification before I try to answer your second question. The token transit is not related to the direct services, and I don't know if I actually said that. But we're looking at several different software packages, and token transit would be applied system-wide. But there is another product that we are looking at that is related to the direct services. So I just wanted to make that distinction. But as to your question, yes, Safe Rides is a direct service. I don't remember if you were on the advisory board when we still had the Southwest Direct or the Northeast Direct. So we used to have direct services that worked in boundary areas of the district, and if there's some potential that we may bring back that type of service, and that would also apply to this.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Just one quick word before we let you off the podium, if you will. We typically, since I've been on the board, had these back and forths on ridership and decline in revenues and so forth. I guess trying a different, are there any bright spots? It seems like, you know, the slow drift down with ridership and that. Do you see any change in that pattern? Or any indications? Or just, obviously a very subjective question, but I'm just curious if you felt that there's any change anticipated.
You're indicating?
Yeah, well, we've talked about this many times. You got MCOR, gas prices, low gas prices, people moving, students moving in closer to the campus. The big change has been in the student ridership.
Again, given
kids
that's the
moving in
biggest
is-
part of our ridership, without
Right.
doubt.
The problem is, when we went to analyze this statistically, was that the decline in ridership period has not been long enough
Right.
to really figure anything out, to assign cost. But we know who the players are, or at least the big players are, and I just mentioned them.
So.
No, I mean, again, you know, we don't want to go back and forth. I was giving you the opportunity to shine some sunlight on a less than optimistic view.
Yeah. So as you and I have talked about before, I wouldn't necessarily paint it in a pessimistic view, because there are, as Bruce pointed out, several factors that are associated with it, and some of them are just environmental and economic that we don't have control over. So it's just part of the environment in which we operate. And then secondly, we just, not enough time has gone by since
Sure,
the
no,
last time we
yeah.
talked about it to really have any kind of
Right,
different
no,
answer.
I would not, just if there's anything different. Yeah, because I do, interesting facts too, little things, the variables. Precipitation in 17 has been 1 inch, and last year was 6 inches or 5 inches, and gas was 204 this year, 240, so it seems to be almost impervious to those metrics too.
Yeah, although, well, that's right. Those are not, and that's what we indicated when we gave you the presentation on the regression analysis with the ridership, that the infill development has more of an impact than, say, weather or gas prices.
Sure.
Those certainly play into it, but they're not the driving factors.
As indicated by those precipitous changes, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you have a comment, Matt?
I guess just to put it in terms that I kind of understand, so basically we understand or have a hunch that there are several factors that are declining or contributing to the decline in ridership, yet we're going to wait a little bit more until we are for sure that ridership is declining consistently. Is that what I'm hearing? I guess we're going to react when ridership has declined to a point where it's no longer tolerable. I mean, I'm not sure what I'm hearing right now, but that's kind of what I'm trying to summarize into something that maybe is more understandable.
Well, you're not necessarily hearing that that will only react when it's no longer tolerable, but you are hearing that it certainly would be too soon to try to react to something that we don't have a complete picture of what we're reacting to right now.
Okay, because I mean, I know MCOR is kind of we like to point the finger at MCOR and say that's what's contributing to a lot of decline in ridership, but on page 9, if you look at the percentage changes, and if we're assuming that the MCOR area services U of I faculty, that is relatively unchanged, where you're seeing significant changes in adult rides, annual pass ridership, all-day passes, transfers, and safe rides. So I don't know, how do you spot a trend 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now? I don't know, but I guess that's what Jim and I have kind of been saying for the last 3 months, is that we're seeing these declines and we'd like to know what's happening, but it seems like let's just wait some more until it becomes a problem.
Any other comments? Okay. Then let's move on to committee reports. The Administration Committee, Bruce, do you have anything?
Nope.
Okay. And then the Facilities Committee. Okay. And on the agenda is a presentation about the terminal expansion.
Right, so I would not call it a presentation so much as opening the floor for a conversation. And I had informed, or well, you knew that we had a media event a week and a half ago regarding the Illinois terminal expansion. And so the point of that was to bring that project that staff has been working on for several years out to the forefront so that we could begin having a public conversation about it, and that you as a board could start weighing in on some of the decision making, though we're not asking for decisions at this point because we're just starting this process. But we had to start the process in order to get to the point where we can bring things to you for decision making. And so this is, as you know, as I've talked to you before, Illinois Terminal has been fully leased out since the day it opened, and we have current tenants who want to expand and can't, and we have potential tenants who contact us and they can't. We can't accommodate them. More importantly for us and our operations, between our services and the intercity buses, Greyhound, Trailways, Peoria Charter, and the like, we are at maximum capacity with the number of buses that we can accommodate on the property. And so we did a year and a half, or I guess it was 3.5 years ago, we did a study on the viability of expanding Illinois Terminal, and we hired Ratio Architects to do that. And so we started examining whether or not that was something that we wanted to do. And as we were progressing through that, we came in contact with a local developer, Hans Grodelution, who developed and built the Hyatt Place in downtown Champaign, and Hans is here today. So I'd like to invite him up to the desk as well so that he can participate in this and give you some information. As Hans and I started talking about a project that Hans was working on, and then our project, we both had reached out to city staff about the likelihood of utilizing TIF funding for infrastructure improvements. And as we were having those conversations, it kind of just became clear to us that it would be a better utilization of resources to combine the projects rather than having two separate projects and spreading resources thin. So Hans and I started having conversations about what would that look like if we combined the projects, and they've been good conversations, and so we decided to bring this to the next step. And so I'd like to just turn it over to Hans for a couple of minutes and let him talk about his side of the project a little bit beyond just the transportation expansion and Illinois Terminal expansion, but what his project is and how it would connect to ours. And then we can open it up to questions from the board.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to the board for taking the time to allow me to speak and not so much give a presentation, but be available to answer questions and kind of give you my 2 cents about the process and where we are. So this was a public process to begin with a Washington and Walnut development proposal almost 2 years ago now, where I expressed interest to the city, said, hey, I'm interested in another hotel and a mixed-use development project in downtown, and how can we move that forward? City Council gave the planning department, gave staff authority to begin a negotiation process about how to enter into a contract and get that done. They didn't approve any project or any details. It was, hey, let's all talk about it. So for the last 2 years, then, I have been talking back and forth with city officials, with the city staff. One of the things that took a long time, that's a part of that process, was the creation of a new TIF district. And so soon after we got this authority from council 2 years ago, we realized that a TIF district would be helpful to help offset some of the parking and infrastructure needs. It took literally over a year, maybe 14 months, I think, to create the TIF district and get that finalized. In the meantime, we didn't really want to do too much, spend a lot of money, do anything in detail, because there's always doubt whether the TIF district can get done or not. And so we wanted to wait until it was finished before we moved ahead. I believe that was in January of this year, 2017, when they got the final approval on the TIF district. Also, in part of that process, and this, I was approached by some, I'll call them hockey enthusiasts, hockey consultants in the world, who said, boy, wouldn't it be great, Hans, if you added an event center or an arena that could hold a hockey team, minor league, or perhaps maybe we can talk the university into adding it as a sport. So as these people approached me with that idea, I thought it would be great. I thought it would be a wonderful addition to the project that we're working on. We went down the road on the north side of downtown, of Washington and Walnut, of trying to see if it would fit, if an event center would fit there. We had some discussions with members of the University of Illinois to say, hey, if we were able to pull this off, would you have interest in being a part of it? And the short, quick answer was perhaps, we'll have to see. But they did say, the number one comment was, we'd like it a whole lot better if it was a little bit closer to campus. And somewhere then in the month or two that went by, I said, oh my goodness, Illinois Terminal is thinking of expansion through MTD. On the south side of downtown, where there is 10 acres of ground of underutilized parking, dilapidated old buildings, old recycling plants, and so forth. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could merge these two developments, also give a proposal to the university to say, here's a new event center, which is now closer to your students at Springfield especially, and see if we can advance that forward. So now this is now just in the last 4 or 5 months, and the Division of Intercollegiate Athletics then decided they needed a feasibility study in order to contemplate hockey. They have announced about a month ago now that they will undertake that study. It is in its beginning stages, or soon to begin, perhaps. And we would like for them to finish their feasibility study and see if there's a room to include them in this proposal. So here we are on the one hand, it's 2 years into a project. On the other hand, it's the absolute beginning of it. Everything we've done so far has just been speculation, kind of groundwork. Does the project even have legs, to bring it to boards and to bring it to the public attention? We think it does have legs. We think it's ready to be analyzed and developed and vetted further, and we want to begin that process. And Carl, is there something I'm leaving out?
No, I don't think so. If any of you have questions, then I think either Hans or I can field those.
Actually, I do. I'm sorry to preempt the board members, but could you walk us through what all these buildings are?
Yeah, you bet.
Because I think our original project from Ratio would have ended where the high-rise buildings end.
Yes, exactly.
I see the Illinois Terminal. What are all those other buildings?
Yeah, good question, and I'm happy to talk about it. One thing, just to say here in the beginning, is that's a beautiful picture, and we appreciate Ratio helping us put that together. It is in no way an end, here's what we're going to build. It's a preliminary concept of what we think is a possibility, provided all the pieces work together. And then specifically, though, what we're proposing and what we hope to accomplish is, maybe it's easiest to start from the Illinois Terminal building. You can all recognize that. We need to have a building and parking structure and expanded bus area that would be immediately to the south of the Illinois Terminal, which is kind of buried behind these high-rise buildings, actually. And that would extend then to Walnut Street. And so the building on the left, prominent building on the left, that's the existing Christie Clinic parking lot. And so depending on the needs of MTD, how much expansion, I've said to Carl, 5 times, the most important thing is how many buses do you need, and how much square footage do you need for buses? We have to start with that. And so that building and that structure would expand through the Christie Clinic parking lot to Walnut. Then we would cross the street to Logan, and there may or may not be some kind of connection over Logan. Logan would stay pretty much exactly as it is, I believe. The tallest building in the picture then is a hotel with apartments on the top of it and a convention conference center down on the bottom lower portion, and additional parking behind it to the tracks. Continuing further south then would be a possible event center that would seat about 5,000 people. And so we are under contract with some of the ground that exists underneath of those buildings, but not all of it. We have a few pieces yet. We're negotiating with owners and expect to get some positive resolution. But depending on those results, it'll twist and wiggle and change a bit.
So, Margaret, if I could, real quick, just add on. Hans mentioned that this is a conceptual drawing. At this stage, it's a conceptual project. We don't have a development agreement. The city doesn't have a development agreement with Hans. There's no intergovernmental agreement yet between the city and MTD. This is really the beginning stage of talking about those, and we will be seeking authorization for staff to negotiate those agreements. So I don't want you to come away with the impression that this picture is a done deal, because it's not, and things could look very differently. The Division of Intercollegiate Athletics could say, you know, we're not going to do hockey, we're not interested, or some version of those, and that part of the project would fall off, and Hans and MTD would still have the ability to talk about whether or not we want to continue to move forward with the remainder of it, and what that would look like then. And so this can be phased. We certainly would love for DIA to come on board and say, yes, this is what we want to do. We think this would be great for the community and for DIA and the university. But they have a decision that they need to make. So I just want to make sure that point is clarified.
Linda?
I mean, it's really pretty exciting to think we could have that kind of development downtown. I do have a question. The big square white roof, is
Yes.
that the event center, or
Yes,
that's
it
an
is.
event center?
Yes, it is specifically.
Okay, yeah. I think just as we see people starting to come live closer to town, in town and midtown, it's good to see being able to bring events there too, instead of somebody, building way on the edges.
Thank you. I agree completely. That's why we're excited about it.
And there was a friend of mine, I mentioned this project to, who said she would be very happy to take the bus to the hockey games.
Great. There goes your ridership.
Yeah.
One more.
Margaret, Hans, quick question, and also just as a follow-up, one of the audience members touched on financing. And again, we're in such a preliminary stage, but have you any comments on, and maybe even Carl too, because people have asked me, and I said, well, it's preliminary. What is your response at this point, how you visualize, assuming this thing starts to work, financing?
You bet. I would say it's preliminary, and so we would believe fundamentally that between the MTD, the city, private development, perhaps the university, that we can present some ideas for a financial structure that will work down the road. We're not even close to being able to present or talk about any of those kind of ideas because we don't yet even know all the components. The one thing is the university, since they're evaluating their hockey and perhaps an event center need, that impacts the rest of the project. We can't even just cut that out and build everything else the same. The number of parking spaces we need, the transportation studies for the roads and light signals and so forth, and all the different components, those will adjust. And so we're kind of going to try to advance this, open this public discussion, give them a chance to evaluate whether they want to be a part of it or not. Then we'll make a decision about how we go forward from there. And at that time, begin to have the plans for financing and how do we package it and put it together. Does that answer it?
Yeah, and somebody said to you, taxpayer, is it going to cost me money?
I'd say no, not a bit. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be any dollars at all coming from an entity like the city or the MTD, but the TIF district is a mechanism that is created where in general, broad, big pictures, all of this land right now currently pays real estate taxes. Or I suppose if some of it is city-owned or nonprofit-owned, it doesn't pay. But there's a baseline of how much dollars it pays in real estate taxes. What a TIF district does is it says those same dollars will continue to flow to the various entities that they support, whether it's the MTD, the city, the park district, the school district, or so forth. All those entities will continue to get their same amounts. But if things happen within the TIF district to increase real estate tax revenues, those increases, just the increase amount, can be spent towards projects, towards infrastructure within the TIF district. And so there are dollars coming from government entities, MTD, city, real estate taxes, and so forth, but only if we're able to increase them. And Carl?
totally correct, and I would only add on to that, Jim, because that's not dissimilar to a question that we received during the media interviews last week. There's no plan for additional taxes. So when we talk about a sister agency like Unit 4 had this big capital project that they need to do, and they put a referendum out for this bond issue, that's all new taxes on Champaign. There is nothing like that under consideration for this project. There's no new taxes that we are planning on initiating and diverting to this project. As Hans mentioned, there will be funds that MTD has through its levy, and that hopefully, I mean, what we want to talk to the city about is their participation within this TIF district to use that increment financing, which is tax dollars, but it isn't new. It's no new tax to residents of Champaign. So there's a differentiation there that when somebody says, are there tax dollars or are there new taxes, this isn't a project like the Central High School project. This is not a bond issue, but there will be public funds that go to the project.
You said too, though, that say if this goes to fruition, increases revenues without a doubt, that you can make the case that tax rates may even go down in certain ways because we've created new revenues.
I would love to say that, but I will not.
All right. Just offer you that opportunity.
I can't say that tax dollars will go down. I could speak a little bit about the Hyatt Place in my development agreement with the city of Champaign, which also is in a TIF district. How that works a little bit is that TIF district where the Hyatt Place is located literally expires in about a year, either this year or next, 2 years, I'm not sure exactly, but very soon it will. And after that time, when that TIF district is over, then MTD, then the Park District, then all the different taxing bodies that benefit from real estate taxes will get an increase. And so far to date, real estate taxes from Hyatt Place have been refunded to Hyatt Place. That was part of our agreement. Very soon, the TIF district is going to expire, and that will no longer happen, and we will have generated literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxable revenue to the various taxing bodies. So there's a waiting period. If you're patient, as an example, this TIF district will expire, I think, in 22 years. 22 years is a long time, but eventually everything in there will contribute be on the tax rolls.
Very good, thanks.
Well, and I assume that there will be hotel room taxes and parking fees and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Any other comments?
So just real quickly, one thing that we hear a lot of conversation about is with this project, what parking is needed. We don't know yet. We'll hire some consultants who do that for a living, and they know very specifically how to analyze that and come up with that answer. Another one is, what does this do with the traffic flow? I mean, this is just going to be horrible for congestion downtown. We're aware of where we're building this, and we will hire traffic experts on looking at that and how to accommodate congestion. And one of the things that we've talked about that we really like is that on the whole, this event center is doing things in the evening hours or weekend hours when the congestion or the traffic is much, much different in downtown than it is Monday through Friday, call it 7:30 to 5:30. So there's some off-hour utilization that helps, but that's one of the studies that we'll do. So Hans mentioned traffic signals and things like that. I mean, we need to make sure that this works for our operations as well, that the buses can get in and out of Illinois terminal. And so all of that will be encapsulated in these studies that are still pending and that we need to work out agreements for.
So what's the next step?
So the next step is, Carl and I are meeting with city council members to brief them in this process and to gain their support for advancing it further. We're also waiting a little bit for the DIA at university to see the results of their feasibility study and then kind of raise their hand to whether they have interest in being a part of it or not. And those things will be ongoing. And we're getting ready to, I would say, we're going to begin looking for consultants for traffic and so forth, parking, and trying to get that lined up without actually advancing it yet, but just exploring those and getting them ready to go.
And I would caution you to not necessarily expect major advancement month to month at board meetings. This is a process, and we want to move as quickly but as diligently and properly as possible through the process. So we're not going to be racing through it, and there may be some months that we're not reporting much to you relative to happenings or changes and that kind of thing. But when we do, then we'll have sessions like this, and we'll be bringing agreements to you and contracts for consultants and things like that.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. Oops, sorry. Now we move on to the action items. The first is to authorize the execution of the Downstate Operating Assistance Grant Agreement, which is on page 46 of your packet. Are you going to speak to this, Jane?
I can speak to it. There's not much to say about it. This is
Yeah.
the same resolution that we bring every year to execute the grant agreement that we have with the state for the operating assistance program.
Is there any comment, questions, whatever, from the board?
Is there a number, Carl, on this? The page we had, I didn't see a number. What is the grant amount, or is that even a fair question?
It's 65% of operating expenses, so there's no change from how it functions in previous years. So the budget that you passed,
Yes.
the expenses, 65% of that would move through the operating assistance program.
So multi-millions.
Yes.
And if we don't, if we don't spend everything, we don't get matched. Is that correct? It's a match of what we spend.
Yes. Yes.
So if we're behind on expenses, we're behind on the match.
Just to keep it simple, I'll say yes. There are some technical details to that could muddy things, but in effect, yes, it's 65. It's a reimbursement for 65% of the expenses that we incur for operations.
But that's why we don't have an exact amount.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, for instance, we just talked earlier. We were under budget in our expenses for last year. So the previous year, a budget was approved, and then we spent less than that, about $4.5 million less than that. So 65% of that $4.5 million was in the grant agreement last year, but we didn't spend that $4.5 million, so nor did we recoup 65% of that because we didn't spend it.
Yeah, I guess to make it clear to me, it's not that this money is sitting in a pocket somewhere. It goes into the pocket when we spend.
Right.
Madam Chair, I would move approval.
It has been moved and seconded to approve resolution number 2017-6. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, resolution is passed. The next item on the agenda is page 48. Policy of rules and regulations for conduct on MTD vehicles and on facilities. Do we have some discussion of this?
Just as an intro, I'd like to invite Alex Parker up to the table. Alex is one of the district attorneys, and he helped to update the policy and procedure that is before you. And so if you do have questions, he's here and available to answer those from a legal perspective. And I will do my best to answer from an operational perspective. But in effect, this is a policy that we have had since 1999, and we are adapting it. We generally have used it for facilities, and we are adapting it for both facilities and vehicles. So it now has a system-wide approach, and that allows the district to make exclusion decisions for vehicles like they have been made for facilities. It is a very, very rare occurrence that this happens, but every once in a while, an occurrence might happen where we think it's better for the safety of the other passengers and our own staff to exclude a person from riding a vehicle.
Did you have anything, sir, that you wanted to say?
I will just echo Carl's comments. This has been in effect since 1999 for facilities and vehicles. And certainly if there are any questions in terms of the little green light says yes. I apologize. I'll speak up if I can't be heard. So this has been in effect since 1999 for facilities and vehicles, and is basically being updated. And I can go through some specifics if there are any questions, or if there are any broader legal questions. I can certainly answer those.
I had one question. This seems to me to be quite written so that it preserves due process for the person who is going to be, come under this policy. I guess my question is do you think that it also adequately protects the district in case there's some conflict? I mean, in case any person who might be excluded from the facilities or the buses or whatever would want to, sue or fight the determination.
Well, I guess there's a couple questions in there to try and answer. First of all, in terms of due process, yes, I believe it will adequately protect the due process rights of a member of the public. Not only has this policy been in effect, but if it is approved, we will have a policy on the books with a clearly listed, what the prohibited behaviors are. Now, it does include in there that this is not necessarily an exhaustive list, because we wouldn't want to necessarily pen ourselves in if something beyond what has been contemplated here, and this is a pretty lengthy list, but if something comes up that is beyond that, we wouldn't want to be able to say, well, gosh, our hands are tied, we can't possibly do anything. And so not only is there going to be this policy on the books, and my understanding is that it will be published and available on the website, so it is accessible to the public, is that if there is an exclusion made, which, by the way, will not be an easy process, and I know that, again, what's been added in here is the people who are going to be able to do that is a limited number of people in the district. So this is not something that an everyday worker at the MTD can do. This is the chief administrative officer, the chief operating officer, or a similarly positioned person can do that. Beyond that becomes the appeal. And an appeal has been in place since the 1999 version. So again, it is protecting the due process rights of the public there. And that appeal is made to the managing director. So the way this is written is the managing director does not have a role to play in terms of the initial exclusion. He's insulated, he's outside of that process, and that if there is an appeal, it is made to the managing director, and the managing, he or she, would make the decision on the appeal. So I think that answers the question about the due process rights. Your other question, I believe, was talking about if someone does do something in a facility or on a vehicle that the MTD would want to pursue, that would be something that would really be not connected to this policy. The district, as it is a municipal corporation, as enacted under the laws of Illinois, has the ability to sue and be sued already. So if someone would damage a vehicle, something like that, or a facility, that's already something that the MTD can pursue.
Any other questions, comments?
Margaret, I had a couple of questions.
Yes, please.
Maybe some of this is allayed by Carl's explanation that this is a very, very rare occurrence, so that's helpful. I was looking at the website on my phone, and so there's a code of conduct. Is that the existing policy that this policy is to replace, or is there something else?
Not really. The code of conduct is more of a summary.
Okay.
But what Alex was referring to was that this will, once and if approved by the board, then this will be on the website. It is not now.
That's helpful. And then the other, and I don't know, but letter J talked about use or possession of alcohol, and I just was curious, is that true that if someone goes grocery shopping and they choose to buy alcohol and take the bus home, is that a violation of the policy, or is it open alcohol that we mean?
That's meant to be open alcohol, not packaged.
Sure.
Correct.
It's an odd thing for someone from the university to ask that question maybe, but I was curious about it. And then, but the other piece of that that I just maybe want to comment on, or just, again, because it's very, very rare, but there's comment about appropriate dress and attire and some other things that I read them that I just wanted to make sure that we were looking at that from a content neutral sort of way in terms of how we were going to be addressing that, and that there weren't going to be any unintended negative impacts for certain members of our community based on how they might dress. And so, again, just we all have our own definitions of appropriateness, and that's something that just made me, that rose to the top when I read it.
Yeah. Certainly, you know, the way this is written is to try to avoid, I'm sure we've all heard of no tolerance policies and how well they work in our society. You can hear I'm jesting with that. That there is not, the MTD already cannot discriminate against someone based on age, sex, gender, orientation, the protected classes as recognized in the law. So certainly this policy would not enable someone at the MTD to try to discriminate on those bases. I mean, that's right off the bat. And yes, to piggyback on what has been said, this is used in such a rare fashion. I can only think of one or two instances over the last 20 years that this has been used. So in reality, you know, we're talking about something that's probably going to be rarely ever utilized, and I would seriously doubt that, again, unless it's something that probably the most of this room would recognize as, you know, that's inappropriate dress. This really isn't directed at someone's dress and how they're dressing. This is more addressed at criminal activities, activities that endanger operators, other passengers, activities that interfere with service, you know, providing, and also built in there as part of the contemplation of implementing an exclusion is going to be, you know, what are the circumstances? And as you can see in here, there is a lot of room in terms of evaluating what are the circumstances of a particular situation.
Linda?
I'm having a hard time figuring what would be inappropriate dress in this day and age, unless it's no dress. I'm sure we've had an example in the past. What would that mean?
You know, it's, your comment is probably well taken in this day and age. Perhaps no dress might be about the only thing that might be inappropriate. Certainly, I would be loath to stand up here and try to list examples of types of dress, but certainly I suppose we could imagine certain types of male or female swimwear might be inappropriate on a bus given a situation. But then again, I am hesitant to start picking out examples.
Yeah, I would suggest that we not even try to list examples. Again, this is not something that we are attempting to apply liberally. We take an extremely conservative approach to application of this. So I don't mean conservative in terms of determining appropriate dress, but conservative in terms of application of this policy. We have no interest or desire in being fashion police, but when circumstances are eye-poppingly obvious that something needs to be addressed here, then this allows steps to be taken to do that.
Any other comments, questions?
I would just propose that at least open be added to letter J, if that's truly the intention for the board to consider. And then I do think that, I appreciate the commentary about how it would be used conservatively, and I think that that's the appropriate thing to do. We want to make sure that we don't have any rules on the books that are going to make people feel uncomfortable, because there certainly will be riders on the district who will have their own sense of what appropriate should be, and this might encourage them to voice that, to say any number of things that may be inconsistent with our intentions. So just food for thought.
Okay. May I suggest that for the purposes of sort of moving along, we approve or move to approve this policy with the understanding that that slight language change will be incorporated before it actually gets put on the web, if that suits our attorneys.
I think it's important to know how to do this by now. I think it's important to review these just in a little bit more detail before they actually get published.
Okay.
So approving them in concept is a good idea.
Okay, so, sorry. So it's been moved, seconded, that we approve the...
Second.
Okay, approved. It's been moved and seconded that we approve these rules and regulations of conduct. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Okay, the resolution is adopted. Okay, one more thing. The closed session minutes review, which is on pages 52 to 56. As the memo indicates, we do this semi-annually to look at the recorded and printed minutes of closed sessions. Our attorney has listed a sample motion as to how to deal with these. Will somebody move the motion?
I'm supposed to read this, I think.
Oh,
Is that
please,
right,
please
Beth?
do.
Where's Beth?
Before, just a quick question. I was just curious on this line, workers' compensation cases that are 20 years old. What does that mean? Things that are still in litigation, or what? Fred, I mean, what does that mean?
No, these are minutes that were taken a long time ago that go into great detail with respect to somebody's physical condition. And those for a long period of time will need to be kept confidential to protect that person's privacy. As I said, the minutes that were taken years ago, 20 years ago, went into much more detail than you would expect in a set of minutes.
And these were related to employees
They're
primarily?
related to employees' workers' compensation claim.
Injured or however.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Should I read them?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so here's the suggested written motion. The Board of Trustees hereby determines as follows. A, that the minutes or portions thereof of the closed session meetings of the board listed on attachment 1 and unquote, marked, quote, release, unquote, no longer require confidential treatment and are ordered released. B, that the need for confidentiality still exists as to the minutes or portions thereof of the closed session meetings of the board listed on, quote, attachment 2, unquote, marked, quote, remain confidential, unquote. And C, that the verbatim recordings of the following listed closed session minutes, quote, attachment 3, unquote, all of which are not less than 18 months old, and the written minutes of which have been approved and are authorized to be destroyed.
Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Okay, motion carried. That takes care of all the items on our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second? Okay, all right. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And then our next meeting will be Wednesday, August 30th at 3 p.m. right here. Thank you.
Just wanted to say one last thing. What a good job you did, Madam Chairman.
I've had lots of good people to model myself for.